You know, the year that I was born, there were 6,000 languages spoken on Earth. Now, a language is not just a body of grammar or a set of words, and language is a reflection of culture. It's a flash of the human spirit. And of the 6,000 languages spoken on Earth, fully half are being taught to children, which means that effectively, unless something changes, they're dead.
What this means is that within a single generation, we may be losing fully half of humanity's intellectual, social, and spiritual legacy. This does not have to happen. These cultures are not failed attempts at being modern. They are unique answers to the fundamental question. What does it mean to be human and alive? I've studied Buddhism as an anthropologist, but this is a personal journey. A journey that will lead me to the deepest lesson of Buddhist practice, behind a weathered little door in an ancient nunnery near the foot of Mount Everest, in the light at the edge of the world. How do you take a spiritual journey in Buddhism? Where do you begin? Who do you follow? The Buddha was a teacher who started this practice 2,500 years ago. In Sanskrit, Buddha means the awakened one. His teachings are known as the Dharma. They are a spiritual path, a roadmap to enlightenment. The Dharma is designed to lead us all out of samsara.
Samsara is simply an objective observation that in this world that we live in, and who can deny it, we end up slaughtering children, raping mothers, dying of foul diseases, having accidents just on the eve of our weddings. I mean, whatever all this stuff is, the Buddha would say it's the realm of samsara, and the cause of it is suffering, but the great possibility revealed by the Buddha is that it can be transcended, that if ignorance is the foundation of suffering, ignorance can be relieved.
But pursuing the Dharma doesn't just promise an end to suffering. It aims to eliminate the very causes of suffering through spiritual practice. A science of the mind that charts a roadmap to goodness, humility, and compassion. One takes refuge in the Buddha, considering him not a god, but a guide. You take refuge in the Dharma, which is not a dogma, but a path. Of all the religious traditions that I've encountered in my travels, this is the one that has always made the most sense to me. My path begins in an old Mi-17 helicopter, a shuddering Russian war relic. We lift off for a trip into the Himalayas, back to where the monasteries are. Many of the Buddhists of Nepal were once the Buddhists of Tibet before the Chinese ran them out and destroyed their temples in the 1950s. Escaping across the mountains, they came together at monasteries like Thupten Choling and Shiwang, where they are preparing right now for a great festival. As much as this is a trek into some of the most stunning country in the world, it is also for me an adventure into the mind. It's about seeing what's in there, discarding what's unnecessary, and focusing on what truly brings happiness.
There's something about the inherent tolerance of Buddhism that is incredibly attractive. It's totally non-judgmental. There's no notion of sin. There is no notion of good and evil. There is only ignorance and suffering. And this is the most important thing. It places all emphasis on compassion. You know, you do not embrace negativity. It is a religion that does not demand some kind of act of blind faith. It does not demand that you buy into the dictates of a faith and then go out and persuade the rest of the world to think like you. It is simply a system of wisdom. It's a philosophy. It says, here is a path. Here is a set of contemplative practices that you can do. And that if you follow this, we have 2,500 years of empirical evidence, scientific evidence, by the very definition of what science is, that says if you follow this, you will achieve this transformation of the human heart. And that's why we use a concept, Buddhist science of the mind, because the evidence of the efficacy of that practice is a serenity achieved by those who embrace it.
I can explain Buddhism in words, that's easy for me, but I'm still seeking meaning. The path to enlightenment requires basic tools, and the first one is meditation. Real meditation is said to calm the mind. The common metaphor is that the mind is like a windy lake. The waves make it impossible to see the bottom. But by stilling the waves, the water, the vision, becomes clear.
Okay. So for men's first left. Okay.
Do you want me to take a
Yeah,
watch
that's better.
The first guide on my journey is a Tibetan doctor, Sherab Barma. Sherab's medical training took 7 arduous years. 1 year was devoted purely to meditation. Even today, he leaves his practice for a month each year to return to a cave and meditate.
You relax. I need meditation.
When Sherab does the pulse diagnosis, you know, this is, again, not a trivial, arcane exhibition. It's not sleight of hand. It's been, even by Western scientific terms, it's been recognized that the Tibetan pulse diagnosis can be extraordinarily precise. And the fascinating thing for me is that in bringing his intellectual, in a sense, medical attention to that challenge, at that moment of diagnosis, he's also bringing his entire meditative, attentive mind to that moment.
Okay, please can I see your tongue?
Within the Tibetan realm of medicine,
Please, you can look my finger.
there is no easy separation between the state of the mind, the state of the spirit, and the state of the body. They're all intricately entwined.
Okay. So you're in a good health, but I see in your eye, in your pulse readings, it's little bit your maintenance problem. This means like I think you're make a planning lots of, or your like a mind work or something like that. I feel because of your heart send message. And little bit you are tired or you're not sleep well or some worried or kind of that.
So really what you're saying is that my mind is so, needs to be calmed or needs to, what are you saying?
So you need little bit rest, and if you can, this meditation is important.
Sherab sees that my mind is swirling and my thoughts are ragged. I need to find the stillness. This is a search for meaning, not for the next life, whatever that may be, but for this life, now. The sanctuary of Tupten Choling. Since the Buddhists fled Tibet, this monastery has become one of the main centers of the Tibetan spiritual world. The 800 monks and nuns who live here are preparing for the Mani Rimdu, a celebration of compassion that represents freedom from samsara for all the sentient beings of the world. The Buddha left behind 84,000 lessons, or sutras. They are all part of the teachings of the Dharma. The sense of serenity in the prayer hall is deeply moving. The music, the rituals, the recitation of mantras, the monks and the nuns chant their prayers so consistently that it's almost as if they become the prayers themselves.
You know, this is not all about the twiddling of thumbs. This is 2,500 years of scholastic vision, of intensity by millions of people to try to understand the nature of existence and to encode that in a set of scriptures that become like roadmaps to the path of liberation and wisdom.
The scarves, or katas, that the monks and nuns throw forward represent the nature of karma, the principle of giving and receiving. They are both offerings and appeals to Trulsig Rinpoche, the abbot of Totten Choling, a teacher of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and one of the most revered enlightened beings in the Buddhist world.
Rinpoche means the Blessed One, not the human being, but the man who has become one with the teachings. He is both teacher and teachings. He is the embodiment of the Buddha path, not because of his own sense of ego, but because he has transcended ego and become one with the essence of the Buddhist practice.
Totten Choling has grown so much that they have had to build a new central temple and quarters for the additional monks and nuns. We have an audience with Rinpoche, and it's a little daunting. I've spent my life obtaining knowledge through university and field studies, but the Rinpoche has spent his lifetime achieving wisdom and enlightenment through contemplative practice.
You know, the first time I was in the presence of Trulsig Rinpoche was 3 years ago when I visited Totten Choling monastery, and I was working on another project, and I had a whole list of specific questions that I was planning to ask him. When I came into this room with all these questions, I forgot all the questions and I started to cry. And tears came down the corners of my eyes. And, you know, coming from the background that I come from, you know, men don't cry, and they certainly don't cry easily. And these weren't sobs of the kind of tears you get when you're saddened by the death of a father. These were kind of tears of just spontaneous delight that were just pouring forth from my eyes. And all the questions that I had planned to ask him were simply evaporated. And I just felt this kind of charismatic presence. Now we come back to make a story of the essence of Buddhism, to try to bring that story to the West and the science of the mind that is the Buddhist tradition.
So before you forward your question, so if you like, you can bring now your question.
Well, our question now is
Asking Trulsig Rinpoche about Buddhism is a little like asking St. Peter about the Bible. There are few minds as bright and clear on the planet. But I'll have time for my questions. Rinpoche will be coming with us to the Mani Rimdu festival at Shiwang, a monastery not far from here by helicopter. So we make ready to leave.
감사했어요. 감사했어요. 그러면 일단 되네.
There are tens of thousands of people in this part of the world who would give their eye tooth to spend one moment in the presence of Tulsa Rinpoche. And we were blessed by him. He is the embodiment. He is the 33rd reincarnation of the most foremost disciple of the Buddha. He represents all of that Buddhist lineage. And the point of Buddhism is not simply to, clear the mind, still the lake, and all those wonderful metaphors. It's to embrace compassion. It's to be compassionate.
Rinpoche is living proof that compassion can be achieved as a state of being, that contemplative practice will result in serenity and enlightenment. This is what we mean by a Buddhist science of the mind. It is the empirical pursuit of the truth. But the amazing thing for me is the realization that there really is a path that can lead to a transformation of the mind and spirit. When we speak of a Buddhist science of the mind, we are talking about a philosophy developed by an Indian prince named Siddhartha, who achieved enlightenment under a Bodhi tree. Siddhartha became the Buddha. Monasteries like Thupten Choling, the one we just left, and this one, Shiwang, are repositories of Tibetan Buddhist thought. The trouble these days is that Shiwang in particular is vulnerable. There has been a Maoist uprising in Nepal for the last decade, and almost all of the Shiwang monks have fled harassment for the safety of Thupten Choling. Now only 8 stay here full-time. But this is a time of year when Shiwang comes to life again. Tibetan pilgrims, Sherpas, and dignitaries all come here for the Mani Rimdu. The Mani Rimdu is a ritual recreation that celebrates the arrival of Buddhism in Tibet from India. Phosig Rinpoche says that to experience the Mani Rimdu is to receive a blessing. The prayers before the pageantry of the festival connect to the very essence of Buddhism. The fundamental idea is that everyone has the potential for inner transformation. We all have our own perfect jewel buried deep in the earth. All we need are the tools to find it. The Dharma is designed to remove everything that obscures our true Buddha nature. Mathieu Ricard arrives. I'm going to be looking to him as my 3rd spiritual guide on this journey. At one time, Mathieu was a leading scientist at the Institut Pasteur in Paris.
I mean, here was this man from a highly distinguished French family, his father a major literary critic, Mathieu himself a brilliant molecular biologist, clearly on his way to a great career in science, Western science, and at some point for him, it just wasn't enough, Something was still missing. You could reduce all of material existence down to a single gene, a single atom, and you still had to ask the question, why?
His sort of becoming more and more difficult to understand. It is very sweet. And he's very, very devoted to Rinpoche and Rinpoche. You see, we are ready to spend 15 years to go through education. Then we spend another number of years to train professionally. we spend a great amount of time, jogging and doing gymnastic and going on this bicycle and rolling sort of things, and then to get healthy. And then we spend another amount of time, taking care of our appearance, going to have some nice hairdo or whatever. Now, how come we don't even spend a few moments every day to see how our mind works, which in the end is what determines the quality of our life? So that's very puzzling, in fact. So why is that? I think there's a kind of slight hesitation, looking at our mind. That seems a bit weird. I met somebody, a young person in California, who told me, I don't want to look within myself. I'm afraid of what I'm going to find there. I told that to Dalai Lama. He said, oh, that was more interesting than going to the movies. So much happening in your mind. It's such a fascinating adventure.
As the monks prepare for the Mani Rimdu down below, we take a side trip with Trilsig Rinpoche to a mountaintop above Chiwang. It's a place of deep spiritual meaning that he hasn't laid eyes on in nearly 40 years. This is Sengepuk, the Lion's Cave, where Rinpoche went into meditative retreat after he fled Tibet. Retreat is a time for the mind, a time to focus on prayers of compassion for the sentient beings of the world in a place that eliminates all distractions.
How does he feel coming back right now?
It's the same as before. It's just the same. It's just staying just as it is.
The monks say that Rinpoche achieved enlightenment here and had a vision of his own teacher soaring in the form of a vulture. With a tear in his eye, his teacher asked Rinpoche to come with him, to leave the realm of samsara and move beyond this world.
And that Trilsig Rinpoche, in this lifetime, looked up at that possibility and said, no, I cannot go. I still must remain in the realm of samsara to help the suffering of sentient beings.
That is a true Buddhist hero. Not a warrior or a king, but the bodhisattva, a person of pure heart and compassion who embodies the teachings of the Dharma.
Actually, when Moshe stayed here, it wasn't like that. It fell down. So
This is the place where Trilsig Rinpoche used to stay. In the sunshine, on his old patio, Rinpoche stuns me with an impromptu teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the very pillars of Buddhism. I've read about the Four Noble Truths. As an academic, I can recite them by heart. But that's not the same as receiving them from Rinpoche through the translation of someone like Mathieu Ricard.
So when first the Buddha gave the teachings after achieving enlightenment, the first teaching he gave was about the Four Noble Truths, which is actually recognizing the existence of suffering, acknowledging, and recognizing that suffering has a cause and condition that can be dispelled.
The first noble truth, of course, is that all life is suffering. Now, suffering doesn't mean necessarily misery, and it's not a pessimistic or even a nihilistic observation. It was simply an objective assessment of reality, that life is suffering, that we all grow old. And the second noble truth was this idea that suffering itself is based on ignorance. By ignorance, he didn't mean stupidity, but by ignorance implying that the clinging to the illusion that the world and that existence itself had an intrinsic concrete reality, that everything was tangible, static, permanent.
So now, in order to get rid of ignorance and the mental toxins and afflictions and obscurations, We need to rely upon someone who has more wisdom than we have, more understanding than we have. So hence the notion of a spiritual friend or a spiritual teacher who is showing us the path, who is indicating how we could go about removing the veils of ignorance.
The third noble truth was the idea that suffering could be relieved through spiritual practice, that ignorance could be banished from the realm of perception, that you could actually find a solution to this human dilemma. And of course, the fourth noble truth was the delineation of a specific contemplative practice, a path of wisdom that promised, if followed, to allow you to transcend the realm of suffering.
All of that reading, all of those scholarly works on Buddhism, none of it prepared me for the overwhelming resonance of a simple lesson from a blessed teacher.
All those things, you know, and then when you hear it from someone like that, you know?
Yes, of course. That's the obvious. So, otherwise, you know, this is quite obvious the way people got lost in what they wish happiness, but they run towards suffering. Although we aspire to happiness, we got completely confused about the means to achieve genuine happiness. We mistake happiness and pleasure, happiness and intensity, happiness and so many things. We don't realize happiness is a way of being that comes from inner freedom, not just from trying to enjoy as many things as possible, because that's like running after a rainbow, hoping that we can wear it as a dress. No, it never works. They hope for happiness, but they got lost in the wrong means of achieving it. So that's the drama of sentient beings.
Back at Shiwang Monastery, the courtyard is transformed into a theater in the round for the performance of the Mani Rimdu. It tells the story of Buddhism being brought to Tibet, but it is also a celebration of the totality of the human experience.
Think of it as Shakespeare. Think of it as being in the Globe Theater. So it's a morality play written by a lama as a way of making manifest in a public way all the kind of forces of existence. And those masks, which represent particular beings, particular deities, they are also, in a sense, metaphorical. They represent, it's almost like a pageant of all the forces of samsara and all the forces of divinity with which one will engage in your own dance of life.
Symbols of good clash with demons, the positive with the negative. Every dance is a Buddhist teaching. Long before the dances began, monks were behind the scenes at Shiwang performing puja, a concentrated series of rituals. The monks focus all of their spiritual intuition and practice into the making and empowering of sacred mani pills that allow you, literally, to eat the power of the Dharma.
It's like all ritual. What is ritual attempting to do in any spiritual tradition? Ritual attempts to quiet the moment, to focus the mind, to bring one into the presence of the spirit, the presence of God. I mean, this is the whole point of any ritual tradition.
A gentle mob jostles to get near Tulsig Rinpoche, to receive his blessing and be given the mani pills of compassion. Much of this feels familiar to a Westerner. A blessing from a priest, the offering of the host, absolution from sin. But here there is no sin. There is only the repeated reminder that ignorance, which stands in the way of wisdom and happiness, can be overcome by the clear path of the Dharma.
You know, in a sense, Buddhism is neither philosophy nor religion. It's strictly a path of wisdom. And in fact, serenity itself, the serenity that you see in an enlightened being like a Tulsig Rinpoche, is the empirical evidence of the success of the science of the mind that is Buddhism.
But what do I do next? The pageantry of the Mani Rimdu must give way to the spacious silence of the Himalayas. Sherab and Mathieu are going into the mountains with me as we bid Tulsig Rinpoche farewell. Our journey will follow high mountain paths through Solukhumbu to the flank of Everest and the home of a simple nun who will show us Buddhism stripped to its essence. The most basic lesson in science class is to have a hypothesis before you conduct an experiment. Then you record your observations and draw your conclusions. With their science of the mind, the early Buddhists observed that through contemplative practice, they achieved happiness and wisdom. They drew the conclusion that the Dharma worked. 2,500 years later, Western scientists wired up the heads of Buddhist monks, including Mathieu Ricard, to see what happened inside the brain of an experienced meditator. Amazingly enough, the very structure of the brain changed. Western science revealed that the Dharma could literally transform the human being. For the monks, the experiments were fun, but not really necessary. They already knew what meditation did. They already had empirical evidence of lives changed by the Dharma, their own.
So, you know, when we speak of meditation, in the West, people have quite exotic idea of sitting under a mango tree and sort of, you know, blissing out and having a good time for the rest of the day, like a relaxation thing. Or they often say, you know, when you meditate, you have to blank out all your mind from all thoughts, isn't it? So there's a real misunderstanding about what meditation means.
For most of us, when we think of meditation, and many of us have tried it, you know, everybody from doctors to our churchmen tell us we should check it out. We shut our eyes, we try to stay still, and our minds are just exploding with stuff, you know.
See. Well, the idea is, you know, usually when we think of calming down the mind and we become aware of what's going on in the mind, we say, wow, there's so many thoughts. There's more than ever. Actually, it's not that there's more than ever. You start to become aware of what's going on in your mind from morning till evening, this whirlpool of thoughts. Because your mind is like a spoiled brat. It's constantly moving here and there, thinking of ruminating the past, imagining the future, never in the present moment. So try to focus your mind. And we say it's like the butterfly. You know, the butterfly stays on the flower then it sort of goes away for no reason, then comes back. So it's okay you will be distracted, but you should bring back your mind. And so meditation will help you to become the master of your mind. And master of the mind is not the absence of freedom. Sometimes people think that, I'm going to control my mind. I'm sort of reducing my freedom. Take the example of the sailor at sea. What is the freedom? To let the boat drift wherever the currents and the wind blow? That's not freedom, that's drifting. Real freedom is to take the helm and navigate where you have chosen to go. That's freedom. So if you are in charge of your own mind, that's freedom.
The 11th century Tibetan yogi, Milarepa, said, "Take refuge in the solitude of the barren mountains, the snows or forests. In the wilderness cave, you have an open market where you can barter samsara for nirvana."
How old is she?
I think she's in her 80s because she was...
84.
Well, not the one from yesterday.
No, I mean...
To pursue the Dharma, the aspiring Buddhist needs to take refuge, go into retreat, and meditate. Behind this door lives Ketsun Ani. She is a nun who has been in solitary retreat for 45 years, never leaving the confines of this simple hut. She has distilled her entire religious practice to 3 simple mantras, prayers for the welfare of all sentient beings, recited again and again through every hour of her waking day.
Now, here is this woman, by all accounts, extraordinarily beautiful young woman, devoted to the Dharma, who suddenly was kind of besieged by a suitor, a wealthy merchant who had the power to really demand betrothal.
She escaped the suitor by climbing down through the hole of a cliffside latrine, then fleeing to a monastery.
And she was a legend in the region. Every Sherpa who marched toward Everest would go toward her retreat and pay homage to her. But no one had ever seen her. She had never been photographed. She had never certainly been interviewed or talked to.
She has not been totally without human contact. She receives food twice a day, and Sherab treats her medically.
And I will never forget in my life that moment when that wooden door creaked open. And what did we find? We found, in fact, an incredibly ebullient, talkative, friendly, kind. Her first gesture was to give us cookies. And what did she do? She went right into the Dharma. And she sort of said to Mathieu, essentially, it's great all that monastic stuff you guys do, and, I respect it, and it's quite wonderful, but, it really just comes down to a single mantra.
She deeply prays for all sentient beings to be free from all sufferings, outer and inner sufferings, and so from her heart she dedicates the merit as she recites the Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of Avalokiteshvara. So it's like the one Dharma that condenses all.
Om Mani Padme Hum.
Yes.
So her life has been completely dedicated for 45 years to solitary retreat, to the recitation of the mantra, and all directed toward the well-being of all sentient beings, almost like her heart, just spreading compassion.
Yes. It all boils down to our own mind, the quality and the nature of our mind. So all the, whatever the Buddha has taught, all the many aspects of his teaching, they were all meant to understand the nature of mind. So the main thing is to give away all elaborate practice and simply remain in the Buddha nature, in the Buddha's mind, and that's all. And she said, if she survives, with her mind, she'll come to visit me sometimes. So I told her I'll prepare a nice cup of tea.
Finding serenity through the Dharma is the experimental proof that validates the Buddhist science of the mind, just as a falling apple proves to us the existence of gravity. It may be hard to understand what this means, but it exists for the Tibetans. Many Tibetans do not believe that we went to the moon, but we did. We may not believe that they achieve enlightenment in this lifetime, but they do. At the Tukten Choling Monastery, Tibetan Dr. Sherab Barma is in high demand. In one day, he will see over 100 patients, diagnosing everything from cataracts to smoke inhalation from the fires in the kitchens. Western science and efficiency, a Lama once wrote, has made a major contribution to minor needs. We spend much of our time in the West trying to ensure that people live to be 100 without losing their hair or their teeth. The Buddhists spend their time giving meaning to existence.
The Buddhist spends all their lives getting ready for a moment that we spend most of our lives pretending does not exist, which is a moment of death. We in the West, I think, constantly confuse knowledge for wisdom.
It's little bit you relax your body and straight in our spinal cord.
You see this in old men all the time in the West. You know, they say, what do you mean? I've worked so hard. I've built General Motors and goddamn it, I'm going to die? Or, I've got 15 PhDs from Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and Oxford. My God, I know everything about diatoms, and I've been in every genetics, and I've been at every conference, and I've gotten the Nobel Prize, and goddamn it, I'm going to die. And they haven't thought about that. And the essence of Buddhism is the notion that all life is fleeting. Every moment of time is precious, and you have a choice.
When I finally sit down to meditate beside Sherab and shut my eyes, I'm overwhelmed by the non-stop mental traffic in my head. It happens to all of us, and most of the time we don't even notice that it's there. But when you meditate, even for a moment, you realize how far you have to go before achieving even the possibility of being able to calm the mind.
In that particular moment of meditation in that space, your thoughts move through your mind, and the metaphor used always in Buddhism is the mind is like a windy lake with the wind buffeting the waves and causing the water to be turbulent, and if you can somehow still the mind, you will clear the lake. And so as you go deeper into that kind of meditative state, sometimes just sort of raw emotions will just come up.
Tears often come to the novice, for to meditate is to allow oneself, often for the first time, to be still. And to be still is to glimpse the true nature of things. Like so many of us in the West, I dwell too often in a whirlwind of frenetic activity, racing against time, defining success by measures of the material world, books, academic degrees, credentials of one sort or another. This, to the Buddhist, is the essence of ignorance. They remind us that all life grows old and dies, that all possessions decay, and they offer an alternative, a path of wisdom, long and difficult, but to me, irresistible.